Well, then, thank you for the introduction. As you said, it will be a little bit technical. And, well, what's about, actually, it's pretty easy to say. We pretty much you should all know path graphs, which were introduced in the last talk. And the whole concept is about how I may be able to convert this into something like this, which is a Petri-Net. Is everyone familiar with Petri-Nets? Okay, I will give a short introduction. Anyway, first I want to say why I did this in the first place. Actually, what I wanted to do was do experimental comparison of, well, process modeling languages. And we had a graph. So I wanted to give, well, different process models in different process languages or modeling languages to process natives and see how they can cope with it. Actually, pretty similar to a talk that is done right now in the next room. But I wanted to compare things like paths with Petri-Nets with BPM and so on. And, well, we had already past models of our KIT application processes, actually real-life processes, how to apply or how to register for exams and such things. And, well, I had the options to either model it by hand in another process modeling language, or I thought, well, maybe I could use an automatic tool and convert it. And since we had actually had at Professor Sese's department, we had a master thesis that proved that every path graph can be fulfills all of Van der Aal's workflow patterns, if you're familiar with them, or at least back then when it was only 96, now it's a little bit more. Anyway, so the thought was, could actually be pretty easy and no great thing. So because I wanted to generate graphs that can be, that are legible for human beings, that can be read by human beings, the first thing was about how I can arrange them graphically. So it's first a graphical approach and in the beginning and less a formal approach. But it turned out that actually you can come up pretty, you come up with some problems, some formal problems very fast. So that's how I got there. Why Petri-Nets? In the first place, I mentioned Van der Aalst in the beginning. Anyway, it's a basis for the YAWL process modeling language, which is actually quite widely used, and it also has been used to specify or to evaluate the effectiveness of other process languages like BPEL or so on. It's not very liked by Professor Berger, who actually wrote a paper on where its limits are, and actually I kind of can show where some limits are concerning that. But first, introduction. Well, do I need to go on what path is about? Probably not in here. Or? Well, you've got subjects, you've got messages between, and you've got these kinds of states. Petri-Nets, as some of the audience kind of gave the impressions, are not so you're not so familiar with. You mentioned that it's a bipolar graph. It's pretty much a graph made up of two different kinds of nodes. The round ones, places. The rectangular ones are so-called transitions, and there are arcs connecting them, directed. You can mark places, and then you can later on pretty much fire transitions, it's called. Pretty much whatever this transition represents in a real process is executed, and it leads to a next state of the whole graph. The state of the whole graph is a certain arrangement of markings in the places. So if there are now two marks or tokens on these two places, then it's one state, and if I execute this transitions, the token from this and this is taken away by this transition to the arc, and one is placed on the next one. It's pretty much Petri-Nets in a nutshell, or anyone disagreeing? So how can we convert this? Well, actually, it's pretty easy. I started with this little thing, and as you can see, it's a very simple process, only 3 subjects. I made an abstract example, which is only pretty much linear process, very simple. I hope you can pretty much guess what it is. You do something, you send something, it gets executed. Here's actually a decision in here, whether or not to send something back or forward. And the last subject is pretty much only receive and reply. And this pretty much implicates that the swim lane approach is first thing that I did. So because in every of these languages that tend to come up with big process wallpapers, there's kind of swim lanes. So in order to make it human legible, this was approach 2. So you see every subject pretty much gets whatever is represented in certain areas. And also, based from this subject, there is on every swim lane, there are so-called message places. So when every subject can receive certain types of messages, and those who are familiar with the pairs modeling notation know that every subject has a kind of message box, which was mentioned in the last speech. And I thought that, well, if you receive a message, a token is placed in your inbox, and it's a very intuitive concept. So as soon as the message is there, it can be taken out and the process can continue, which is, I think, the best representation for the message concept in Petri-Nets. Straightforward. Well, then we've got function states. Function state in the subject behavior diagram can have arcs, so-called transitions in the path graph, path transitions that go out of the state. And I represented it in a Petri-net with a place, and you can choose one transition to take one token out of this and go to a next state. And I chose this because this is the classical representation to say that it's an XOR decision, and as far as I'm aware, every function state is implicit an XOR decision. You can only choose one. You cannot do separate. There's only one thing. And in Petri-Nets, this construction with a place followed by several transitions is the most simple explanation for an XOR transition. Of course, there are more expressionist versions of Petri-Nets, especially if you go to YAWL, where there are special transitions explicitly saying XOR, but this is they are only macros for this construction, and therefore I chose this. For send states now, there is in this example only a single transition going out there. I represent the send state, of course, as a state, as a place. And a transition now, exiting out of it, makes two things. In the one subject swim lane, it places a token on the next state, wherever this transition in the path leads to. And now, this is what happens, of course, it also places a token on the message state of another subject. Well, and of course, if you want to receive it, every subject has, for certain message types, a place. And if I have a receive state, and what is usually the case, I can take out different messages. I can only fire this transition, as it's called, if there is a token on the receive state and the according message. It's only exemplatory. Well, that's it. No. Would be nice if it was that easy. It isn't, but this is a basic conversion if you have subjects and want to put it in a single graph. But we are talking about Petri-Nets, and there are widely developed theory behind them, and especially in the workflow area, there are certain conditions that must be met to form actually workflow nets. And the first thing is that a proper workflow net has a singular starting state and a singular end state. So if that's the case, the theory allows to compute whether this final end state can actually be reached. It's one of the advantages of Petri-Nets, that there's actually lots of formal foundation that allows such computations which can actually be used. Anyway, these states are not part of the original path graph. But in order to fulfill this, and with especially several subjects, the converter I wrote adds this singular state and then a transition that marks the first state of every subject. Before it was mentioned that every subject has a starting place. Implicitly, you said, at least in Metasonic, it's explicitly because it's marked as a starting state. And therefore, the first marking state is marked of every subject. Will be a problem later on, but will be mentioned. Also added are final states. This is called an end state place, which is actually be added. It's, for now, let's say it's just a state that is marked as end state. And if every subject has a token on a place as an end state, you can fire the final transition and the end is reached. So we need to add this construction in order to have a workflow net for the whole process graph description. Yeah, this is described in the original pass. Okay. The problem is that in a pass graph you can have more than one end state, different outcomes of this. And so what's actually needed is that every subject gets an additional place that represents the end of the subject. So of course, if this is a transition leading to the end state, which is of course again a place, it needs only to needs also to place a message, a token on the final end state place for that subject, which is not part of the original path graph. While this construction, other way, this is stop. Of course, this will lead to a problem that the process, if this is marked and the final state is marked, the workflow condition is not met because it says there must be only one final place. But of course, this leads to a final transition, and this is the final state. So we have at least two tokens that have no arcs going out of there, which is a definition for an end state place. Oops. Wrong button. So in order for that, one of the details of the converter is that you can actually leave these places out if they're only end states in order to keep the workflow property going on. This you can do, of course, if the end state is simply a token for end states and has no further meaning. Problem is, of course, especially in the past, you can leave end states again. You can model this without problems. And if you want to model this, of course, therefore we have this end state place. You can come into a place that is final state, which will put a marking on this place and on this. But if you leave it again, you want to restart the process or the subject can do something else again, you must take this again away. If not, the next state is not an end state as well. So this is a way to cope in Petri-Nets with the possibility to leave these states. Okay? And yeah. Another problem is with the, I should have mentioned it maybe a little bit earlier, but I put it here in the presentation. Function states have an implicit duration. If a subject is in a state, it has an internal execution time, it does something. This is now a problem when translating actually path graphs to Petri-Nets, because there is a simple, a little, well, how to say it, difference in concepts. In a Petri-Nets, a state is simply a state. Nothing is happening. It is the place in the moment. While every action or everything that is happening happens during transitions. If something takes time, you model it usually in a transition. So in path graphs, the arcs going out there are actually only arcs. Usually, okay, message sending is done implicitly or formally, but what we would perceive as the actor is doing something is modeled in the function stage, which is, and that concept is not represented by a singular place. So in order, if you want to generate a graph like this, you would actually need to add another transition for states in between the states. So we have a first state that the state got entered, and whatever is happening here would be needed to put into a transition in between. And only if this is executed by whatever means, you come into a state where you can actually leave the state again, if you want to keep that. The converter actually leaves you the option if you want to model it this way or not, because, as I said, I want to keep it simple. And this shows also what is one of the big drawbacks. If here we have a singular node and 3 arcs going out of there, and what converting from path to Petri-Nets in the first place does is it multiplies the number of elements visually, which is in complexity theory always a drawback. because you've got more elements that need to be perceived. But formally, it was required in order to, well, represent the whole concept. All right. Then we've got another problem. Optional subjects. As I said in the beginning, the first transition places the marking on every subject in the beginning. So the problem is in here, in this case, simple process, subject 1 can either directly go to the end or maybe optionally request something. In subject orientation, this is no problem because you say simply this subject is either never instantiated, so it never needs to reach an end or not. In a Petri-Net, this is not so easy because if the first transition puts a mark on this place and the final place cannot be reached, then you're limited. And this is only a workaround, it's not formally correct, is that if you have a subject starting with a receive state, you also put a token on the final state. And only if a message arrives here, this state is marked, and also the end state is marked, you can go into the subject. This has, well, the advantage is you can keep the workflow property going on. The disadvantage is that either you leave markings if the subject is never instantiated. You keep a token in the game, which is not the biggest problem, but it's, well, not a clean modulation in Petri-Nets standards. The other option would be to leave out the first state. I mean, I could say, okay, if the first state is a receive state, it doesn't matter. You can leave pretty much this place out. And only if the message is received, you can simply take out this one. The drawback is that, of course, you can return to the first state in some modeling options in paths. You could go back there, so you need this. I decided simply to leave it there and mark this, but as I said, it's not the best option, or it's just the option I decided for to keep this running. This was, well, pretty much how you can convert simple graphs. But of course, there are some other limitations. This, of course, is the first thing I just shown before, that either you can have incomplete graphs or you can have graphs that leave tokens in the middle, which is not very good in Petri-Net standards. Next limit is the message box concept. I said, okay, I add a message box, a simple place for every message box, and actually in a Petri-Net, I can mark more than one token at once, so I can receive multiple messages without problems. But the message box concept, at least of parsers I know it, is that you can actually put logic in there. We had in the last speak, there was actually a message box agent doing, well, logical actions on that, evaluating maybe what kind of message is in there. And this is not what's done here. Actually, for example, you can distinguish between, in paths, you can distinguish between the actual senders of the message. Two different subjects can send the same type of message for the reasons, which would be placed in, well, the same token here at the moment. I think there is a possibility to map this concept if you go to higher level Petri-Nets, which was not what I did here, where in higher level Petri-Nets you can actually add additional information to tokens to be placed in here. But for the simple first approach, I didn't do it. So in order to keep the graph simple, of course, you could also add different additional message places for all the constructs. But this is something that cannot be captured, at least by simple Petri-Nets. If you go to deeper, there may be the options, I think, but or maybe one of you has some ideas for that. But this is at the moment not possible to be captured with it. Also, as simply said, you can put information in the tokens, maybe, but at the moment I don't know how to capture, well, the business objects that gets transmitted with or via messages, which is one of the biggest parts of path modulation. So if I have business objects, simply an example with names and first names, which is a message or can be part of a message, you could put it into a token that wanders around, but actually the whole information, I'm actually not sure if that can be captured. I won't say it's impossible, but at least it's impractical, especially for if you want to show what's going on there. And finally, what is really impossible, multi-subjects. One of the strongest concepts of the past modeling language. It's similar to the first thing I've shown. In past, you simply can decide whether you want to ask someone else or redo or instantiate another subject. And in Petri-Nets, I don't know. Of course, this would be a simple solution. If I know there will be 3 instances, of course, I can duplicate simply the subgraph for every subject and remodel it, but this is a workaround, and especially if you have some construction like here, where only at runtime it is determined, where how many instances there will be overall. I couldn't find a way in Petri-Nets to actually simulate this. There are works on multiple instances, to handle multiple instances with Petri-Nets, but they have a little drawback. The drawback is that you can handle multiple instances of sub-workflows, meaning to have a single input and a single output state. As far as I know, or as far as in papers, it's not possible with to model multiple instances with subjects where you have in a singular workflow many things going in or out. Okay, this is a single example, but a subject can, in his workflow, receive multiple messages in and out. And if you have the condition that there is a single input and a single output to handle the multiple instances, it contradicts the idea of managing this way. So I couldn't find a way to handle this in the workflow for now. I'm interested in ideas, you have some, but for now it's not in there. Okay, this is all the points that are into the converter I wrote. What can be done with it? Of course, I can use the Petri-Net tools and rearrange the graphs automatically. There are lots of tools that can place the things. And this is what happens if you put the graph I showed you before and run it through the automatic completion in the way that the people who programmed this tool think would a good graph look like. As you can see, okay, I don't know, but of course it looks nice, it's straightforward. But even if there's only one message sent, you can see they're already crossing arcs. And otherwise, I think the picture speaks for itself about whether this is really a good idea or not. So I simply put it there for demonstration. I will keep for later works, I will keep the Swarm-Layman approach. Also, this is a real-life process in PASS. It's actually the process I talked about before. It's an application process for exams. So it is that complicated, involves all these different subjects. Okay, there are little technical subjects. This is how it automatically looks converted. And I think I don't need to mention anything about that, or that's a Petri-Net. That's a Petri-Net representation of this, of course, with all the underlying subject behavior diagrams. This is what the converter gave me when I ran it through. It works. And you can actually, the biggest part, of course, is the message things. I think they're all probably, okay, I hope you can kind of discern it's really that illegible, that this is always the message lanes where the messages go in and out. And I think here you can see somewhat of the actually swim lane concept. I hope it's kind of discernible, but it's really big anyway. And I think this proves one of the points I usually say when what I like about PASS is that you can separate the different actors pretty easily and not make, well, this big tapestry. Which is, of course, which I only can claim, and the picture speaks for itself, but if I want to keep it that way, I need to prove it in an experiment, which was the whole point of writing the converter. What you can also do is, of course, use the semantic analysis tools of Petri-Nets. I used the WOPET tool, which was developed in Karlsruhe at the DRBW Baden-Württemberg. And what I also already can show, okay, you can find easily dead transitions or non-live transitions in Petri-Nets, which is a warning sign, can be a warning sign that the past graphs, at least in the single subject diagrams, subject behavior diagrams, are not complete. But there are also something like boundless places. I'm not sure actually what the implication is. 5 minutes. I think we can manage. This is the last slide, I think. Anyway, unbound places is the optional subject that caused this anyway. And I haven't done research about all the possible implications, but of course you can use it. It never finished with that one. I tried it, but it kind of crashed. So how viable this concept really is would be one of the topics that could be interesting to look into in the future. And with that, I'm finished on time, so open for questions.
And I hope we have a lot of questions.
Yes, just a first question. Does the converter also works from Petri-Nets to pass?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. It doesn't.
No,
it doesn't. The problem is I haven't found the option. If you want to convert back from Petri-Nets to pass, you would need to keep the information about who does what in every state. Of course, this is possible in the PNM. I used the underlying concept is the Petri-Net modeling language, which is an XML dialect. And of course, it's possible to keep this information in somewhere and parse it out of there. So if you have, of course, you can reconvert it, I think. But overall, if you have models in Petri-Nets, I don't think the information is there. So I'm not sure. There's a development at the KIT, the Horus Business Process Modeler, which is Petri-Net based. And I think it has the option to save actors. But I think, especially if you model in these kind of languages, the actors get into the process model very late, which is actually a drawback and one of the aspects I like about PASS because it forces you to think about who's put there. So the information, I guess, will be not there. So, and I didn't have Petri-Nets models to actually try to use it. That's probably the main reason. But this is my thought on that question.
Okay. Well, I'm still wondering what you really gain from the transformation. My feeling...
Viable question.
Yeah, sure. You have been quite straight about that. So, I have the feeling that, well, you're optimized. So, I think it's one slide back. No, yeah, that one. Doesn't these kind of models show you the critical passes or something like that? So it might be a nice analysis converting pass graphs to Petri-Nets and then looking at optimized graphs in order to see probably critical passes across swim lanes, which might be invisible in pass diagrams.
That's
an idea. Maybe
that's a great idea. I didn't think about that so far. Or maybe I only thought about, well, you could use some things, but the only drawback I see with that idea is that, well, this is the 3 subject and, you know, it's only a single example. I don't know if this will work for something larger really well. But of course, you can use all this computation. The critical path thing is something that can be captured, and especially if you have some more information, you could also now use the Petri-Net syntax to add some durations in here, which are only partly, I'm not sure, but there are simulation tools for PASS which can add this information later on. And Petri-Nets, there's lots of simulation about how long this takes, and you can compute this later on. And I think it could be implemented very easily if you have a certain special PNML dialect. Also, it depends on what your application is, would be added. Interesting. Thanks.
Well, one further simple question. So what is the problem about complexity? You explained on the next slide. You explained that you could not analyze the converted Petri-Net in order to, using the analysis tool.
The reason is the open source tool crashed pretty much. I used it's a matter of quality. is the reason. I think you can. It should work in theory. It worked for the small ones. There's no reason why it shouldn't work for the bigger ones. The problem is that with all these nodes and so on, I'm not sure how long it will take. About complexity, what I said was also that you see all these crossing lines, which should be discernible, which makes the graph obviously harder to read or harder to interpret for human beings, especially with all the cross-referencing. What I think thought about also is that, well, not having the messages at the front, but placing them on the according level where they're used is one option if the message is only received once or twice. But especially if you receive a message many times or so, I thought it better to put them in a single place and have all these, well, little, not so necessary lines going up and down, but or arcs. So that's what I think about this complexity issue, but it should work.
So just an additional question to that. So did you talk to the guys implementing the tool in order to improve it? So
actually, yes, I did.
Yeah. Okay, but it should be a matter for them to be able to analyze graphs like that, because that's interesting. So in fact, if you compile your path graph to that Petri-Net, it shows you the complexity which is inherent in the path graph.
Yeah.
And of course, there are a lot of potentially problematic pieces in the graph, which would be interesting to be analyzed.
Yes.
So,
that's one of the things where when I said first I started with a graphical analysis, but this is what you probably can do. It's an open source tool, so they developed. Actually, they have in the first version they developed. It was not possible to load the nets at all, but later on the new version luckily works, especially the analysis. So. Yeah, I simply agree with that, but I haven't come so far. But, well, I hope I can work on this later on. Okay. Further questions?
Just an implementation question. You said that theorizing Petri-Nets, you use the Petri-Net modeling language.
Yes.
What did you use for reading the path graphs? Did you read the XML files produced by the Metasonic tool?
Yes, I asked Metasonic for the eCore document and then simply generated the path graph, and then for the PNML I used the libraries of the I forgot some French university, the PM. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but on PNML.org you can find the links to the implemented things to write it to PNML. The sad thing is that there are actually not many tools who can read the so-called open standard PNML thing, especially not our own Horus tool or so, which in theory uses it, but then everyone uses its own dialect. And that's what I used Vopet in the beginning, because it was the first thing which could actually open my generated PNML graphs a little bit. Okay.
You said, you mentioned you're waiting for message types. So is Petri-Nets are using also the term message types?
No. Petri-Nets simply use places.
Yes.
So I simply represent the option to receive a message as a place. I can put tokens in there, but it's from a Petri-Net semantical point of view, it's not different from a state. So only if it's marked, you can take it out. Of course, you can continue. If you want to, for example, here, take this message out.
Okay.
You need to fire it, but there's no special semantics in there. There's only a way to represent it in Petri-Nets and to analyze it maybe later on.
The tokens are not distinguishable.
At least not in the basic ones.
Not in the PT.
Genau.
Because
transition net.
you mentioned that you cannot differentiate who sent the message type. Because if you would make for a message, you would have the sender and recipient also.
Of course, you can model it later on in there. If you mark every place with who is the sender, give it an ID, you can store this information in the token of a high-level Petri-Net. And then, of course, have some other options, especially the intelligent message box, which is still not capturable. You need some execution that actually evaluates some rules or so, or the rules need to be put in there. Modeled, if you want to do that, which is...
I have not got it. The point why did you choose place transition nets for your research? Why not immediately YAL or colored Petri-Nets?
That's a good question. I mean, colored Petri-Nets is...
That is always students say to me, sorry.
No.
During examinations,
no.
Sorry, that's always a joke.
No, it's viable. The first thing, as I said, I wanted to simply generate the legible graphs, and then when I thought I wanted to use the results to give it to persons, then a higher level Petri-Net wouldn't make, at least as far as I know, wouldn't make a two different graph, because information could be stored additionally about it, but in the actually visual representation of the graph, it's not. I'm a mistake.
The visual representation is clear. This is quite different. Yes, but
and
I think this a very interesting work, and I would like to see it in colored Petri-Nets.
Of course.
Because it would be interesting if it is possible to convert paths directly to high-level.
I mentioned already all the things where I can think, where I think.
Or even YAL.
YAL. I think it should be able to be converged to YAL if it's
impossible.
Impossible. I mean, you saw possible, of course, because YAL is, as far as I know, completely well, a macro function of Petri-Nets. I'm not get too deep into the matter, but I don't see why it shouldn't be able. So it would be it could be a next step. So I mean, if you have Petri-Nets and we have a converter from there, you can use it. I think there are Petri-Net converters to other languages. Okay. Next year?
Maybe.
Okay.
I will insist on it. Okay, any other question?
One question about timeout transitions. Can you support them?
In the original Metrasonic graphs, timeout transitions are simply transitions, and they would simply be put in there, and the addition has no semantical meaning. So, I mean, you would simply represent it to take to go somewhere else. It will actually do that, but actually at the moment the information about how long it is and the automatism is not supported by simple PT-nets, which could be an option to use it in the high-level Petri-Nets to exactly put some automatisms like that into the token games, which would of course require then an automatic engine, but well, the Warped tool only had simple click-through examples and automatisms.
I think you will get a problem by supporting timeout transitions of receive actions, because you have messages in the input pool, and now the first priority should be to receive the messages from the input pool, and the second priority should be to fire the timeout transition. And I think
that is not, you cannot capture that concept, yes. And this is, okay, the problem you describe is more like an execution problem, and I think this is in real life, and this was only as a, well, the graph, the description, the process description conversion, so I'm not sure if that is, I mean, timeout, let me think about it, timeout transition. Actually, now
what can happen that the timeout will trigger, but there are still messages in the input pool. This is I think you do not want.
What will happen is that the Petri-Net automatic tools could warn you that this can happen. This is something of the analysis that was spoken before, and well, I can use Petri-Nets to warn me about this fact and say maybe should I do this or not. But that's the only way I think.
But I think
it will not solve the problem.
Yeah, you will get the warning every time.
Yes.
So there should be no token in any place if you stop, right?
Or maybe you shouldn't use token models at all.
So you need a token collector then.
So an arc, so basically an arc and a transition out of every other place, and that would make the graph completely illegible.
Any other questions? If not, then again, thank you very much. I think.